Cuba is an island located in the Caribbean Sea. It has a rich and complicated history with its neighbor, the United States. A combination of competing economic and political interests, coupled with the stark disagreement of ideologies ushered on by the Cold War, contributed to a tumultuous and oftentimes unstable relationship between the two countries in 1957 and 1991. The Cuban Revolution lasted until 1953, when Batista was in power. The US and Cuba had a relatively cooperative relationship.
When Fidel Castro, a revolutionary in favor of major political reform, took power in Cuba, the relationship initially remained relatively stable. However, in 1960, Cuba increased the tax on U.S. imports, and in response, the U.S. placed an embargo on the country. As tensions rose, so did plans to challenge the new socialist regime. The Bay of Pigs invasion was formulated under the Eisenhower administration. It was executed by President John F. Kennedy in 1961. The invasion, which intended to overthrow Castro by deploying Cuban exiles from the U.S., ultimately failed, thus signifying a turning point in the country's dynamic. In 1962, the U.S. began to lose its patience and placed a full embargo on Cuba, causing the country to lose over $130 billion. Other events, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, further heightened these tensions, especially in the context of the Cold War.
Why, with that attitude, have there been so many executions across Cuba without open, free trials?
2 or 3 dozen of criminals, because I think the judge is the first thing necessary for the happiness of the country.
U.S. business interests and the ongoing ideological debate led to the U.S.'s increased intolerance of Cuba. As they realized Castro's unwillingness to act in U.S. interests, they used more obvious tactics in an attempt to destabilize the new socialist government. They called Cuba's nationalization of U.S. businesses harassment and made several attempts on Castro's life. Cuban immigrants were welcomed into the U.S., and they were treated as though they were fleeing a repressive regime. From a U.S. perspective, the influx of Cuban immigrants in the years following the revolution highlighted the incapability of socialism as a system. Without funding from other anti-capitalist superpowers like the USSR, many U.S. citizens believed the economic decline of the country to be inevitable.
There was also a cultural aspect to the U.S.'s disapproval of the Cuban Revolution. With the Cuban Revolution, there was a cultural and political movement in the U.S., the rise of the New Left. The New Left featured the increase of extreme leftists in the U.S. mainstream that supported and rallied with the Cuban Revolution. The movement was endorsed even by celebrities like Errol Flynn and major television programs such as CBS, as shown by the video. This added conflict in American ideological discourse, worsening the U.S. government's opinion of Cuba.
Immigration from Cuba to the U.S. was also very common. The Cuban Children's Program started in 1960. It was a scheme designed to rescue Cuban kids from escaping communist indoctrination. 50 mothers signed their children up for death over being sent to Castro. A total of 14,048 kids were sent to Cuba and were not reunited with their families for 20 years.
Then, in 1962, Kennedy placed restrictions prohibiting U.S. travel to Cuba. This is a policy that has been continuously lifted and reimposed over the course of U.S./Cuba relations.
In 1985, the United States began broadcasting news to Cuba. However, the Cuban government shut it down, claiming it was propaganda. As a result, Castro also suspended the previously established immigration agreement, prohibiting Cubans from entering the U.S.
It's the latest programming in Cuba, available at 1180 on their AM dials. But Havana is jamming the signal and then some. Washington's continuing campaign against the Castro regime.
Between 1957 and 1991, Cuban-U.S. relations underwent continuous changes influenced by internal and external factors on both parts. Analyzing these conflicts through different perspectives highlights the complete span of complexities.